Usually, the most exciting part of the Mexican Grand Prix is the 800-meter straight going into turn 1. And yesterday, it definitely didn't disappoint. Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to break down the Mexico Grand Prix and just give you some of my thoughts about the race and what I took away from it. Now, of course, the very first thing we have to mention is Checo Perez going out and retiring from the race on the very first turn of lap 1. Perez was starting P5 and quickly made up places, going 3 wide into turn 1. When he did decide to go into the turn, he was very aggressive, making it very clear afterwards that his intention was purely to get out of turn 1 leading the race. But unfortunately, he collided with Charles Leclerc and had substantial damage that ended up causing him to retire from the race. Now, this was a very bold move, and in my opinion, one that was totally uncalled for, because although I do appreciate that he's finally driving with some fire and he is being aggressive, he could have easily waited it out, having already been slotted in P3 if he would have just slowed down a little bit, and would have quickly overtaken Charles Leclerc in a couple of laps, and then he could have fought Max Verstappen outright for the win in Mexico. Of course, it's no surprise to anyone that Checo was dreaming of a win at his home Grand Prix in Mexico. He didn't want to settle for anything less than a win. That's why he was so aggressive going into turn 1. He did a very risky move. It didn't work out, and unfortunately it ended his race. Otherwise, I'm positive he would have at least made it on the podium, and I would have liked to see him battle Max for the win, but it wasn't meant to be. But the sad part that came from all of this is the backlash that Charles Leclerc got from this incident. Now, it was clear to anybody that watched the race that at best this was a racing incident, but you could argue that this was more on Checo Perez than anybody else. However, this isn't how the fans saw things. There were videos circulating the web that showed Mexican fans beating up and assaulting fans that were wearing Ferrari shirts in the stands. This is absolutely unacceptable, and I don't understand how these fans can even justify doing something like that. Even if it would have been Charles's fault, this is by no means a green light to assault other fans. Your role as a fan is to be a spectator and to enjoy the spectacle in front of you, but you can't cause harm to others. I read reports that the fans that were doing this were banned from any F1 events for life, and I think this was the proper and only way that this situation could have been handled. Completely unacceptable in any sport. And another sad thing that the fans did was that when Charles Leclerc was talking and doing his interview after finishing P3, they were booing him, and he felt so bad that he had to stop answering the actual questions and explain to the fans that he had nothing to do in the incident and he couldn't avoid it no matter how hard he tried. Instead of enjoying his moment of finishing P3, he felt the need to explain to fans because there was just so much hatred coming towards him. And that really isn't cool. Now, of course, I don't want to generalize and say that all fans that were at the event were doing this, but the ones that did do it stood out, and it doesn't leave a good mark on your fans or on the event itself. That's why I thought this was the first thing we need to touch on, because I really think this could have been handled much better, and hopefully we don't see a repeat of this in the future. With that aside, we got to see Max Verstappen's 16th win of the year. He's now beaten the record for most wins in a single season, and he holds 72% of all race wins this year if he were to win no more races. This is a season that's been absolutely remarkable for Max, and he's continuously breaking record after record after record. At this point, I don't even know if it's enjoyable for him anymore, or he's just going through the motions. He seemed much less tense and much less aggressive towards his engineers than he was in Austin last week, although he did make some remarks when there was a red flag, which I think were a bit uncalled for, but maybe in the heat of the moment they're understandable and explainable as well. Magnussen hit the wall with his Haas pretty hard. Thankfully he was okay, but to clean up all the debris and the Tech Pro barriers that were kind of destroyed, they decided to pull out a red flag about 35 laps into the race. This was interesting because there had already been some pit stops and people were going for different strategies, but now under a red flag situation, every driver has the opportunity to change their tires. So basically, it's like a free pit stop. This opened up the door for teams to try different strategies, and Max Verstappen wasn't too happy about this because he was leading the field by quite a bit before the safety car even came out, and he was surely going to cruise away with this victory. Seeing as there were about 40 laps left, most of the field opted for hard tires, which would have been seen as basically the best strategy or the most logical strategy. However, some of the teams that were looking for a more aggressive approach chose to opt for medium tires. Now, I myself personally would have opted for hard tires because I thought there'd be no way that old mediums would last 40 laps or close to 40 laps in a race. That's why for once I had no issues with the Ferrari strategy when they decided to put both of their drivers on hard tires to finish out the race. At this point, Charles Leclerc was in second place and Lewis Hamilton was in third place. Mercedes opted to put both of their drivers on medium tires. Now, this meant that for the 800 meter straight into turn 1 on the restart, Lewis Hamilton would be right behind Charles Leclerc on medium tires, whereas he was on hard tires. Lewis Hamilton surely would get more pace and more drive off the start, so this would be quite a defensive feat from Charles to hold him off for 800 meters. He was able to do so and there were no incidences on the restart, but he was overtaken by Hamilton a couple laps later because originally they decided not to fight too hard because they thought that Hamilton's medium tires would surely die off at some point within the race. But Lewis Hamilton is a king of tire conservation and he managed to absolutely kill it on that final stint. He was so quick, he was even pulling away from the Ferraris, and not only that, he kept Max within 14 seconds, which I know sounds like a lot, but it's a pretty impressive feat. Oh, and just to top it off, he got the fastest lap right at the end, showing that there was clearly more pace in that car. A fantastic drive from Lewis Hamilton, and even more, he cut the deficit into that P2 lead that Checo Perez has over him because he scored a bunch of points, whereas Checo Perez, retiring on the first lap, didn't have the opportunity to score any points at all. Another driver who had an incredible race was Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo, as we know, is currently driving for AlphaTauri, Red Bull's sister team. Now, this is a car that I would say is towards the back of the pack, but that didn't seem to matter at all for Daniel Ricciardo this weekend. He somehow managed to bring the AlphaTauri into P4 during qualifyings, which meant that he'd be starting the race on the grid in 4th. Obviously, he was in the midst of other cars that had much more pace than him, but he wasn't letting up. He was holding his position fantastically, and he would have finished even higher up if there wasn't a restart. This was a wonderful drive from Daniel. He was keeping pace with the Mercedes for a lot of the first stint before that restart. He extracted pace from that car that simply I don't even think that car has. And knowing that he's fighting for that second Red Bull seat next year or in 2 years, this definitely gave him a boost of confidence. And this gave maybe Christian Horner and Marco Helmut something to look at because he's dominating in that AlphaTauri. He's showing flashes of brilliance and looking like the old Daniel Ricciardo that we remember back at his first stint at Red Bull. So in my opinion, he's driver of the day, except maybe for one other driver that could be in contention for that title. And that other driver would be Lando Norris. Lando Norris was starting at the back of the grid in P19, opting for soft tires to try to mix up the strategy a bit. It didn't work out too well. He was still well below the 10th position towards the restart of the race. And even then, due to some bad calls and some unlucky calls with the safety car, he was starting on the restart from P14. Now what he did next was simply amazing. He charged through the field on those last 40 laps, ended up finishing in P5. He showed pace, confidence, patience, everything you could ask for. And if he managed to do this all the way from the back of the grid, I can only imagine how competitive he would have been if he had started up further and would have been in a spot to maybe challenge even Max for that win. I don't know, but surely a podium would have been in question for Lando Norris. Great drive, and although he keeps saying that it's not good enough, he's showing that he has the talent, the skill, and now clearly the car to be competitive and surely get not only win number 1, but multiple wins in his F1 future. However, Tsunoda was somebody that didn't have a phenomenal race. He made contact with Oscar Piastri as they were fighting for some low point scoring position, and he threw a tantrum right afterwards. It was interesting to see how instead of trying to get the car back on the track as quickly as he could, he was throwing his hands up in that cockpit, clearly frustrated and annoyed at Oscar, at himself, I'm not even sure what. But this just goes to show again that, in my opinion, he just is not mature enough yet to be handed that Red Bull seat if it comes down to it. Even afterwards, when his engineers were trying to give him some advice or some information, he wasn't having it. He was telling everybody to be quiet and leave him alone, clearly fuming in that cockpit. This is something he definitely needs to work on because if he can't stay composed in high pressure situations, I don't see Red Bull promoting him to the first team anytime soon. And ultimately, that's everybody's goal as an AlphaTauri driver, is to be promoted to the main team, to have a competitive car that can fight for wins and hopefully championships. Aside from that, there weren't too many interesting things that happened throughout the race. I'm happy that Magnussen was okay after that impact, And I am truly gutted for Sergio Perez because you could see, and not only see, but you know how much this race means to him, being his home Grand Prix, being in front of his fans and wanting to give them something to cheer about. He had tears in his eyes while in the cockpit in the garage, hoping that the car can somehow be repaired and he would be allowed to go out and maybe at least fight or show or drive for the fans that came out to see him. He truly is a fan favorite, and although he's not doing his driving career at Red Bull any favors, I hope he does have a last couple good races here to end out the year, because if he does come back next year, or if he doesn't come back with Red Bull, I want him to finish on a good note because he deserves it. Next week, we have the Brazilian Grand Prix coming up, and there's also been talks on Twitter of some rumors going through the paddocks of something really big, and nobody knows exactly what's happening at the moment, but that's definitely something you want to stay tuned to. If you do want to stay up to date with anything happening F1, make sure to follow me on Twitter, now called X, which I will put my link right up here on the screen, where I post and comment on different Formula 1 related topics all throughout the week. And aside from that, if you did enjoy this content, make sure to like and subscribe and turn on the notifications so that you'll be notified next week when I drop the video after the Brazilian Grand Prix and break that one down as well. If you have any comments or want to add anything, you can reach out to me here on X, anywhere you'd like. Thank you guys again, and see you next time. Bye.